I'm Dharmi Thani, Associate Fellow, Center for Land Warfare Studies. I welcome you all to today's seminar, Nepal and Bhutan, India's South Asia focus. Nepal and Bhutan are important pillars in India's neighborhood policy. There's a need for a comprehensive strategy and integrated roadmap to sustain solid political and economic relations with Nepal and Bhutan. This seminar seeks to bring on board inputs from the concerned stakeholders and academia to enunciate policy options for India and the implementation process required. And I request Director Prof. Nepal to deliver the
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a number of years since Klaus held a seminar on our immediate neighbors. Two landlocked neighbors, geographically, historically, with India, geopolitical and geostrategic issues aside. Transit, trade, dependence entirely through India for geographical reasons. And the present government, and that's the Prime Minister, immediately on taking over the government reins, his first two visits were to our northern neighbors, a sign of things to come. And right now, if we go through the last 2 days and the next two, he's in the other region, which is of great strategic interest to India, in the Indian Ocean. So we thought it appropriate that we look at our neighbors, what have been our policies, where have we reached, what is the roadmap that we can project. I won't go into the figures of trade and other details, the transit treaty, etc. I'm sure the experts will cover that. But there are three basic reasons, or three issues, I would request the panelists and the chair, of course, if you can give us. One, what are the political and economic issues that we can cooperate upon and give value to this relationship? Second, security cooperation, a very important facet in today's environment, is the other issue which we would seek inputs on. Last but not the least, what are the mechanisms or structures or institutional systems required to progress this relationship? We've had ups and downs, but more important is that in future it should be a win-win situation for both. It should be a progressive relationship which gives us benefit and value in dealing with the future environment as it unfolds. With that, I will request Damal to first introduce the speakers, and a special thanks to our chair and the panelists who have been consented to be with us today and bring value to this seminar. Thank you so much.
We now start the first session, Nepal Scaling New Frontiers and Peaks. We are honored to have Mr. Jayant Prasad to chair this session. Ambassador Jayant Prasad joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1976. He's an alumnus of Delhi University and Jawaharlal Nehru University. He served as the ambassador of India to Nepal in 2011 to 2013. He was ambassador to Afghanistan, permanent representative of India to the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva, ambassador to Algeria, and has held various assignments for the Ministry of External Affairs. The esteemed speakers for this session are Mr. Prashant Jha, a journalist and an author. He is currently an associate editor with the Hindustan Times in New Delhi, covering Indian politics and foreign policy. He's written the widely acclaimed book, Battles of the New Republic, a contemporary history of Nepal, which is a deeply personal reported account of war and peace in Nepal, his country of origin. Professor Sangeeta Thaplia works on strategic issues concerning South Asia with a special reference to Nepal. Her areas of research include water security in South Asia and regional cooperation. Mr. R.S.N. Singh, author The Unmaking of Nepal, is a known defense analyst and has authored 4 books. His most recent publication, The Unmaking of Nepal, was published by Claus. I now hand over to Vijay.
Thank you very much, Daman, for those introductions, and Little Nagar for introducing the subject. Actually, with both these countries, the new government, the India government, has made a fresh start. With Nepal, it is calling that after more than a decade and a half, there was a prime ministerial level visit, a bilateral one. And it was quickly followed by a visit in the context of SAARC. I remember Vijay came to Delhi. He's an eminent journalist, a TV journalist now in Nepal. He said that what you guys, you folks have not been able to do in 30 years, your Prime Minister did in 30 minutes in his address to the Constituent Assembly in Kathmandu. What he meant to say was that there are psychological factors in the relationship which we have to reckon with. And this is a generic point that applies to our relationship in the neighborhood, with the exception of that with Bhutan, which is very different. We don't have the habit of frequent high-level bilateral exchanges when all that is required is for an Indian leader to hop across, meet with his counterpart and return the same day. You don't have to have an official visit or a state visit. This is a practice followed in Europe, for example, by China, for example, with its neighbors, and something which we have not been able to do. So this is a failing that there is a conscious effort on the part of the present government to address this issue. Bhutan is different from Nepal, although when we became independent and at a time when our resources were quite insufficient for adequate investments in our neighborhood. Even then, both Nepal and Bhutan, the development requirements of these two countries was addressed through our central planning mechanism. But somewhere in the 60s, this dropped off from the planning commission, that is Nepal, and Bhutan has remained. And in Bhutan, our investments are considerable and will continue to remain so over the next 10 years according to the present plans, because we have the hydro projects which incidentally are much behind schedule now. So we are not going to reach 10,000 megawatts in 2020. That might be by 2030 now instead of 2020. But the financial commitment is per capita quite high. Even for the next plan, the current plan in Nepal from 2013 onward, we have committed an amount of 4,500 crores, which for a population of 750,000 works out to $1,000 exactly per person. And this, I'm talking just of plan assistance. Besides that, there is assistance for hydro projects, which is of a very special and unique type, which we cannot replicate in Nepal, where the private sector has to get involved, because we have built the existing power plants on the basis of grants and concessional loans, which cannot be done because of the scale at which in the future power projects might materialize from Nepal, which has much greater potential than Bhutan. The topic that we have before us is quite upbeat, scaling new frontiers and peaks. If you look at the internal situation in Nepal, it on surface doesn't inspire confidence, because the deadline that was imposed, rather self-imposed by the second Constituent Assembly has come and gone. On the 22nd of January, we were expecting to see the outlines at least of a new constitution, which would have been referred to the people for their comments and so on, and then promulgated subsequently. That has not happened. And since then, a strange kind of paralysis has gripped the political actors in Nepal. And my presumption is that it's something that will not be easily resolvable, because a highly divisive issue, just one issue, stands between the finalization of the constitution, which is the nature of Nepal's future federal state. But going back to the optimism that embeds our consideration today, I would say that if you look at the distance Nepal has traversed over the last few decades, people say that the Nepalese don't have a constitution because they have not understood democratic functioning, that Nepal is not well suited to democracy, that maybe the old system that prevailed was better for a small kingdom, etc., which are really highly misplaced remarks, because what has happened is that democracy never was given a chance in Nepal. In 1950-51, there was the first transition when a 104-year-old Rana autocracy was replaced by what at that time some people made analogies to the mighty restoration in Japan, where the feudal lords were removed and there was an opening in Japan, and modern education and industrialization took place soon thereafter. But that was not to be, and the early promise of a constitution materialized only 8 years later, in 1959. There was the first free and fair election in that year, but the democratic government was removed in the very next year. And then for 30 years there was partyless democracy, panchayat rule in Nepal, firmly under the monarchy. And then there was a people's movement in 1990-91, which led to restoration of democracy, a new constitution. And that experiment, unfortunately, did not even last a full decade, because in 1996 the Maoist insurgency started. And then in 2001, Nepal had the cataclysmic assassinations in the royal family. And then after Gyanen's takeover, there was a kind of autocracy which started creeping back into the system. So the democratic forces of the Maoists then coalesced together and got rid of the monarchy, promulgated an interim constitution, had a peace process going before that, and the ceasefire, etc., came in 2006, early 2006. The 12-point agreement which we held was signed in Delhi. And it's a paradox, by the way, that we were able to extend our good offices and use them effectively in the case of ending Nepal's civil strife, whereas we have not been able to deal successfully with our own homegrown problem of a similar nature. Then, so if you look back in the last 10 years, since 2005 November till today, where are we? We have transited in Nepal from a monarchy to a republican system. We have also transited from civil strife and near civil war, where 16,000 people lost their lives, to a civil order and multi-party democracy. And one thing is clear, and this is accepted even by those who oppose federalism, that Nepal will be a secular federal democratic republic. I think on that basic principle there is no going back. So I don't want to get into nuances. I don't want to foretell what might happen, because we have a very impressive panel here that they are going to address different facets of looking at Nepal both internally and the dynamic of how things will shape in the future, also between India and Nepal. But I tell you, Nepal's potential is the same as India's potential. It has got a great potential. In fact, in terms of natural resource endowment, Nepal is second to none in South Asia, And when it resolves its last remaining internal issue of promulgating a constitution and has rational economic policies, then Nepal will be able to make much faster progress than any other state in South Asia, and will have a much higher income per capita income level than any other state in South Asia, because of the sheer advantages that they have in terms of the drop of the fall in the water level in a span of 30 kilometers of over 10,000 at least feet of big volumes of water means that they can easily install run-of-the-river projects without attracting ecological surprises of the unstable Himalayan region, without getting into the problems of large reservoirs which require resettlement and rehabilitation, which South Asian states have not fully mastered how to do it well. And even without large reservoir dams, ultimately they will have to go in that direction. But for the start, Nepal can become prosperous just by installing generation capacity where there is a drop in water levels through the run-of-the-river process. And then given its climate and the mid-hills region, which is quite large, it can become a medical and education hub. It can develop tourism further. It's already a big tourist destination, but because of civil war and insurgency, unsettlement, they have not been able to exploit this potential fully. And Nepalese are as smart as Indians. In fact, there is a survey in the United States which is in testing, which shows that per capita, there are more Nepalese students enrolled in the top US universities doing medical and engineering degrees, and they are outperforming, like Indians, people from other countries in the world. So Nepalese are, in that sense, in USA, per capita, doing better in the cutting edge areas of education than anybody else in the world. This is something which even Nepalese are not aware of. So with these few remarks, I'm going to first ask Mr. Shanta to address us, and then we will be followed by Professor Thapiar, who teaches Nepalese studies, Inner Asian studies at JNU, and Mr. Arjun Singh after that. I suppose if we have to entertain questions, you have 20 minutes each given to you. So is that fine? Okay. So we start with Mr. Khan, who has written what is the best book on the contemporary history of Nepal, and any one of you who is interested in following what's going on there today, I would very strongly recommend that you pick up this book and see it and read it.
Thank you so much for that, very kind of you. I must apologize, I have a sore throat, and if this presentation is littered with cough, then interruptions, and seek understanding. Ambassador Prasad has set the stage very well. He was one of the most sensitive and ambassadors that India has sent to Nepal in a long, long time. Also, I just need to fill in the details. What I'll try to do, to speak on the political security dynamics, is focus on two key elements. One is how Nepal is managing its internal political transition, and the second is what is the external environment in which Nepal is managing this internal political transition. So to begin with, what is the internal political transformation that Nepal is undergoing at the moment? Ambassador Prasad laid out the history very briefly, and I will not get into it at great length, but I think it's important to recall that a decade ago, exactly a decade ago, on February 1, 2005, the then King Gyanendra Shah had taken over the royal coup. Nepal was then locked in a triangular political conflict. There was monarchy on one side, backed by the military, the traditional democratic parliamentary parties, and there was the Maoists who were waging an insurgency. And what happened was that this triangular political conflict was turned into a bipolar conflict by the end of 2005 and 2006, when the Maoists and the political parties came together and mounted a popular mass movement which forced the king to concede that sovereignty lay with the people and not the palace. So this political transition has its roots in the 12-point understanding which Vice Prasad referred to, which was signed in Delhi. And that 12-point understanding was essentially a one-point understanding. And that one-point understanding was that Maoists would accept the discipline of multi-party democracy and give up violence, and the older political parties would give up their support for a constitutional monarchy, would accept a republic and restructuring the state. And I think if we keep this as the centerpiece of Nepal's transition, it will be perhaps easier to understand what we have been going through. One element of the peace process was Maoists giving up violence, giving up their wartime structures, getting absorbed in the democratic mainstream. But there was another element. The other element was the older parties willing to restructure the state and address the root causes of the conflict. So what we have seen in the past decade is essentially these two processes. So the first element of this process was the Maoists getting absorbed. So once the king into open politics, so once the king gave up and democracy was restored in 2006, the Maoists emerged overground. And once they emerged overground, we got into this prolonged process of negotiation where the centerpiece was how would the sequence, how would this process work out? How would the Maoists get absorbed into the power structure in Kathmandu? How would they give up the parallel state that they had created, their base areas, their wartime structures, their army, their militias? So to become, and this was a calibrated process where the Maoists were slowly given space in the power structure contingent on how they embraced the norms of pluralist politics and gave up their both ideas of a one-party communist regime as well as the structures that they had created. And I think, and this may be of interest to an audience which is so many distinguished people from the military, so one of the key elements of this process was how the Maoists would deal with their army. The Maoists had created the People's Liberation Army. This was a 19,602 strong force, and what the political parties in Nepal decided was that these soldiers, these combatants, that's what they were called, former combatants, would be locked into UN-supervised cantonments across the country. And eventually, some of them would be integrated into security forces and the rest would be rehabilitated. So, this process took a lot of time because it got tied in with power sharing and how much space the Maoists had in government. But eventually what we saw was that out of these 19,602 combatants, 1,500 opted to join the army. And the rest picked up cash packages and retired and went their own way. So that this process culminated when Vice Prasad was there in Kathmandu in April 2012, when the Nepal army took over these cantonments and the PLA ceased to exist. So this was one major element of the peace process of Maoists becoming a normal civilian political party without a coercive structure. But there was another element, and this is the other element that I was referring to earlier, is that the Maoists gave up the war and embraced open politics in return for certain assurances. And that assurance was that the Nepali state would not exist in its previous, would not exist the way it has always existed. And how did it exist? It existed as a centralized, a unitary, hill, upper caste led entity. Nepal is a very diverse country. It has over 100 ethnic groups. But the power structure in Nepal has been monopolized by two communities, sections of elites of these two communities, the hill Brahmins and the hill Kshatris. And the Maoist base, the Maoist narrative was that the way to liberate people is to break this structure and to create a federal state where different nationalities, different ethnicities, different social groups have exercised self-rule as well as shared rule in the center. Now this agenda was later picked up, I won't say later because this is an original demand, the original demand of federalism came from the Sarai. But this was later, this demand got a boost when movement broke out in the plains of Nepal. So we just discussed one fault line in Nepal, which was a Maoist or non-Maoist fault line, but the other fault line in Nepal is the hill plains divide. And people of Tarai, who called Malaysia are people who live largely, not exclusively in the plains, who speak languages like Hindi, Urdu, Abdi, Mehri, Bhojpuri, and who share extensive kinship, ethnic, linguistic ties, cultural ties across Bihar, UP. This section of the population has often been treated as the fifth column in Nepal. There is a deep sense of alienation because there's deep sense of alienation in this community. And there is a sense that they have never been treated as equal Nepali citizens. There was a movement that broke out in the plains in 2007, and the demand was for a federal structure where the plains would, where there would be one or two provinces in the plains, and they would self-govern. And they would also have greater representation, political representation in the legislature in Kathmandu, in the bureaucracy, security forces, and so on. So the promise in the peace accord that the state would be restructured, got a boost after the policy. And the site to institutionalize these changes was to be the Constituent Assembly. In 2008, we had the first elections for the Constituent Assembly. The Maoists emerged as the largest party, the single largest party. We didn't have a majority. But then we got stuck in this process where the Maoists overreached. They interpreted the mandate to mean that they could impose any change that they wished to without recognizing the imperatives of accommodation, the pluralist multi-party setup. On the other hand, the older parties got insecure and were reluctant to make the changes that the Maoists wished to. There was constant struggle, there was constant power sharing squabble, and the task of constitutional writing receded. We had 4 or 5 governments in as many years between 2008 and 13, and the primary focus of during this period was power sharing and the earlier element of the integration and rehabilitation of foreign combatants. Eventually, the term of the Constituent Assembly expired, and we had a second CA election in November 2013. The balance of power changed. The Maoists now were a distant third, and the Nepali Congress did well. So now we have a government led by the Nepali Congress, supported by the Communist Party of Nepal, the five Marxist-Leninists, which is at the moment the leading left of center, supposedly left of center political formation in Nepal. In its politics, it's more right than the Nepali Congress, I would argue. And we have the Maoists and the Malaysians, the opposition. And the struggle right now is how would the Nepali state be restructured, and other elements of this process. As Prasad said, on other issues there is an agreement. The Nepal would probably adopt a reform parliamentary system. Originally, one of the Maoists was a directly elected presidential system, but they are now willing to compromise on that. There will be a mixed electoral system where there will be an element of first past the post, but also proportional representation, which will help the Nepali legislature be inclusive of diversity. But the key issue right now is the nature of Nepali federalism, and on that too there is an agreement on the exact division of powers between the center and the state. Where it is stuck is the issue of territorial demarcation and the number and names of states. Whether the Tarai will have one state or whether it will have 2 states. Most policy parties have given up the one state demand, so they are asking for 2 states in the Tarai, which would be on an east-west basis. But so the ruling parties would like to create a state structure where there would be provinces which would be created on a north-south basis. The hills and the plains would be integrated. That is not acceptable to the Malaysians who feel that this will result in perpetuation of hegemony. In the hills, the division is on the issue of ethnicity and how strongly should ethnic identity be taken into account when carving out states. Should certain ethnic groups be allowed to have provinces when they are demographically dominant? The term that's often used in federalism debate in Nepal is whether there will be ethnic federalism in Nepal. I would argue this is a misnomer, because any way you carve out provinces in Nepal, there will be multi-ethnic provinces. The only question is how the question of identity will be taken into account while carving out federal states. I'll be happy to take questions on the issue of federalism, which is pretty complex, later if there is interest. So this this is the internal political context, and the polarization at the moment we see is precisely on this question of federalism. There is one other element of the process, which is how would this constitution be written. The interim constitution says that the effort will be to write a constitution based on consensus, and if there is no consensus, the constitution can be written by a two-thirds majority. The ruling parties would like to push the constitution through a two-thirds majority because the Nepali Congress and UMN today have the numbers. But the opposition is arguing that this is the foundational document, and the strength of numbers in the legislature at a particular moment should not determine the nature of the constitution. It must be done on the basis of consensus. And if it is not done on the basis of consensus, then it will not be a sustainable document. This is, in my opinion, an eminently reasonable proposition. It is also an opportunist argument because if they had the numbers, perhaps they would have liked to push. But we must remember that in 2012 they did have the numbers and they didn't speak of consensus. There was no effort to, even though they had signatures of over 400 members, the current opposition, the Maoist Madhesi, did not push for a constitution only on the basis of numbers. So I think it is important that the constitution is based on consensus. The external context now. There is no, and I would stress, no external impediment to a political settlement in Nepal. The external environment has never been as conducive as it is today for Nepal to settle its internal political questions. The international community, there is a lot of goodwill for Nepal across the international community. There is a keen desire in it, on the part of India, on the part of China, on the part of the West, that Nepal writes its constitution soon, it gets over the political transition as soon as possible, and it becomes a functional democracy which focuses on the urgent task of economic revival. Over 1,000 people leave Nepal every day in search of jobs. Over 400,000 people join the workforce every year, and there's just no jobs. And that's because our political class, and there's so many opportunities, that's because our political class is so distracted with this task of internal political management, and has not focused on creating the right environment for growth. So there is a lot of international goodwill for this process, and if it is not gone through, it's because of our own internal divisions, not because of the external climate. Having said that, I'll spend a few minutes on India's role. It's enormously constructive at key moments, and perhaps not so constructive at other moments. The 12-point agreement, which was facilitated by Delhi and was signed in Delhi, was an instance of a remarkably constructive attitude and out-of-the-box thinking displayed by policymakers here. They were willing to let go of certain ideological categories which had governed Indian policy till then. Those categories included an attachment to the monarchy, an aversion to the Maoists. They could see that the strategic calculus had moved. The monarchy was no longer a friend of India. The monarchy was not a part of the solution, but in fact a part of the problem. They could see the Maoists were willing to transform, and absorbing the Maoists into open politics in Nepal was the route to stability. And any kind of future power regime in Nepal would lead to the Maoists. And this potential for out-of-the-box thinking displayed by Delhi then is actually one of the key pillars of this process, and I would argue was constructive. There have been other moments when India has got too involved in determining who should be in power and who should not be in power in Nepal, and in short-term games of formation, the benefits of that kind of approach and pushing for a certain formation to be in power are probably limited and end up yielding resentment among other political actors, and does not really yield India the kind of tangible benefits that it could have. So I think at the moment what we are seeing is on the issue of, on these tactical issues, I think India has treated it. This I think happened particularly under Ambassador Prasad's term, and it's been continued, where India does not seek to micromanage issues of power sharing in Nepal. But on the larger issue of the constitution, I think India's strategic goal remains that Nepal has a constitution. And India has a position which I think is useful. The position, as articulated by Prime Minister Modi, who has made two very successful visits to Kathmandu, is that the constitution should be based on consensus. And because that is the only way the constitution will be durable and sustainable. India has, while articulating this position, and Delhi is not investing a lot of political capital, and it's not getting into, implementing this line and trying to push this line and trying to convince domestic actors to toe its line. I mean, it has articulated very transparently a position, and it is up to the Nepali political actors whether they want to adopt this route or not. And I mean, there is a debate within Nepal, I think, where some people would like Delhi to play a more proactive role. I mean, I'm one of them. I think that the only external actor with leverage to shape certain Nepali political processes is India. And perhaps India should invest some of this capital in trying to moderate all sides and getting them to some kind of accommodation. But there is another view, and that other view is equally legitimate, that frankly, it is not India's business, and it is the country's own constitution, and if India manages to force a consensus, that consensus will be, as the term suggests, a forced consensus, and it may not last either, and there will always be this style of this is an Indian-imposed constitution. So it is a very thin line. How does India use its offices, like it did in 2006, in this end game of the peace process, the last lap of the peace process, in trying to get the actors together without doing so in a manner that will end up alienating one section of the political class or one section of Nepali society. Because this goes to the problem is that it's not just a political issue, it is linked to social polarization in Nepal. And India cannot afford to antagonize either the hill communities or the Tarai community. So it's a very thin line, and the dilemma here is understandable. And I think India right today, as we speak, is grappling with whether to invest capital in trying to push a certain solution or whether to be relatively hands-off. I'm just wrapping up, but since this is a question that often comes up, I will anticipate the question, which is the role of China. And I think that if we look at the big picture in Nepal is that India and China are on the same page. There is both seek stability in Nepal, both seek a constitution. Instability affects China because Nepal shares a very long border with Tibet, and China feels that instability in the weak government in Kathmandu will allow other forces, and particularly their suspicion is Western forces, to seek to use Nepal as a base for inciting unrest in Tibet. For India, of course, sharing a little border with Nepal is, given that it shares a little border with Nepal, stability is key. So when Ambassador Prasad was there, for instance, both India and China pushed for time elections in Nepal. And today, both India and China are saying write your constitution. And in fact, Beijing has also said that write a constitution which is broadly agreeable to sides. I don't remember the exact formulation, but the spirit of the statement was that it should be broadly an agreement with them. So there is contrary to the stereotype that there is this great battle, great game on. There are also key elements of cooperation between Nepal's two biggest neighbors on the question of the internal political regime. Having said that, there is also, of course, obviously also an element of competition where China, which is seeking to expand its influence across the globe, across South Asia, is trying to expand its footprint in Nepal. And Nepal also sees China as an opportunity. And I think we'll continue to deepen ties with Beijing. Deepening ties with Beijing has not been, I would argue, has not come at the cost of ties with India, and will not come at the cost of ties with India, because the relationship Chinese officials have often told Nepal leaders this, that we cannot be a the Nepal-India relationship is far more intimate, far more intense, far more multi-layered than the Nepal-China relationship can be in the foreseeable future. I'll just wrap up by saying that while the theme of today's discussion, scaling new frontiers and peace, is a bit too ambitious, I don't think we're there yet, or we're getting there. But once we cross that line of the constitution, I think we can reasonably say that the political, there will be challenges, instituting federalism, federal structures will be a challenge, but we can say that for the first time there will be a broad political settlement, a broad democratic political settlement in Nepal, owned by Nepal's political forces and social groups, and that will allow us to take off. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant, for setting the stage for our further consideration of the subject that we have. And now Professor Tapriyal is going to speak on economy, trade, transit, and infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. Before I start my presentation, I will highlight that I am taking Modi's visit to Nepal as the benchmark or the baseline from where I try to understand India-Nepal relations. Now, India's relations with Nepal got a fillip with Prime Minister Modi's visit to in August 2014, and Modi's popularity had cut across party lines. In fact, he had reached out to common man in Nepal. If you look at television programs of that time, the captions would be Mayavi Modi or Modi Mai Nepal. That is how even media in Nepal were describing Prime Minister Modi. But there was a media hype in both India and Nepal on this visit. First, that an Indian Prime Minister was visiting Nepal for 17 years. I remember, and after Vajpayee, I think no Prime Minister had gone to Nepal. And when Vajpayee had made a statement, he was in Delhi, and he had said that India supports twin pillars of democracy, twin pillars being constitutional monarchy and multi-party democracy. I mean, incidentally, I was in Nepal for a year at that time doing a project. And his effigy was burnt, and there were protests right in front of the Indian embassy, etc., etc. And after that, no Indian PM visited Nepal. So I think, it was not by any chance that PMs were not going, but basically too many things were happening within the country, whether it was Maoist insurgency, changes in government, removal of monarchy by the people's movement, and elections to the Constituent Assembly. So in this period of political instability, India did not want to be perceived in Nepal as interfering in its domestic politics and also in government formation. Second, Modi had, when he visited Nepal, he said in the Constituent Assembly that India would always support Nepal's sovereign right to choose its own destiny. And this was welcomed by all the political parties and leaders, including Prachanda and the Maoist party. So here India was giving message to Nepal that it would not interfere in its domestic politics, and it was a sovereign country. It becomes, even though it is a sovereign independent country, but time and again it has been emphasized. 50 Treaty Article 1 also speaks about it, but somehow message has gone that as if India and the dominant country is interfering in its domestic politics, and Modi gave a clear message to Nepal that no, India would not interfere. Thirdly, again, media reports were there that India Prime Minister had gone to Bhutan first and then to Nepal to counter growing Chinese presence in the Himalayan states. Now, there is, conflict and cooperation between India and China that happens in every place, including the Himalayan belt of Indian Himalayas as well as in Nepal and Bhutan. I'll discuss this in detail at a later stage. And then Modi's image of Gujarat development model was also, liked and propagated a lot in Nepal. How he would able to bring favored businesses in both India and Nepal. When Nepalese considered Bharatiya Janata Party as a strong and decisive party which would be able to take decisions on bilateral matters. And BJP's emphasis on neighborhood policy, which is also mentioned in its election manifesto, finds a favorable response in Nepal. Now the manifesto also gives importance to Himalayas, even though the Himalayas are actually Indian Himalayas. But in both Nepal and Bhutan, I saw that they have taken it very favorably, that India is now giving importance to the Himalayan states. His visit to Pashupatinath temple is unprecedented. No Indian Prime Minister has ever, done a puja at such a massive scale. I think no Nepali Prime Minister has also done. puja except King of Nepal. He had donated 2,500 kilograms of sandalwood to the temple priest as well. I think here there was a voice in Nepal which was saying that does it mean that BJP or Modi or other Hindu organizations giving support to Hindu groups or right-wing elements in Nepal? But Modi made it categorically clear, and before his visit, even Sushma Swaraj said that it was not to give support to any of these groups, and they represent secular country. And I think Modi was trying to emphasize on socio-cultural links that exist between India and Nepal. And because he had also expressed his willingness to go to Lumbini, Janakpur, Muktinath, etc., many other places. And why was it trying to emphasize this? I think, Nepal, which is a melting pot of cultures, of traditions, from both India and China. I mean, there is, Vedic civilization, Tibetan civilization, that you see in the entire Himalayan range, including in Nepal. That continuity of trade and transit of culture somehow, somewhere had become very minimal in nature, and especially after 1950, when China, Chinese forces came to Tibet. And the kind of agreement that they had signed with Nepal, which said that the movement of Nepalese towards Tibet for the religious, Mansarovar, etc., even that was controlled. Nepalese had to take permits to go there. So then, or they had to, register themselves to the checkpoints there, which was not the case earlier. So their movement towards north was minimal. Towards the south, of course, cultural relationship continued. It was also enforced in the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1950. However, I realized that over the years, Indian bureaucracy, Indian politicians also started downplaying the cultural links that India has with Nepal. Because somewhere this Hindu culture of India, and it was as if Nepalese Hinduism would get submerged in the dominant Indian culture. And that is why one was trying to keep a distance, not emphasize on the cultural aspect of the relationship. Whereas the visit of Prime Minister Modi, we see that he actually started this and the cultural aspect, and in fact treaties were signed, or agreement was rather signed on setting up a twin city between Benares, three cities of India as well as in Nepal. And in contrast, what we see that China has been emphasizing on cultural links with Nepal. Year 2012 was announced as Nepal Champion of Friendly Exchanges. China has now invested in cultural resources at home and abroad. It is giving emphasis to Buddhism, and it is using Buddhism as its soft power. And China has already set up China study centers in Nepal. There are 35 at the moment, and they are planning to set up one in each district of Nepal. There are 75 districts at present. Then there are institutes to teach Mandarin language. Confucius Institute was set up in Tribhuvan University for teaching Chinese as a foreign language and promotion of Chinese culture. This was set up in 2007. Now, 4 years back, General V.K. Singh came up in a question answer session in Lok Sabha, came with a statement saying that no instance of China Study Center's involvement in anti-India activities has come to notice so far. So, so it's fine, but at the same time, it has given impetus to, India to promote its cultural diplomacy. In 2006, Public Diplomacy Division was set up to promote soft power in its foreign policy. In 2010, India had set up academic chair in Tribhuvan University in Kathmandu and also in Pokhara. ICCR has set up cultural center in Kathmandu. And, China had started a World Buddhist Council, and 3 meetings have already taken place. China has a large Buddhist population, but that Buddhism is different from Tibetan Buddhism, because Tibetan Buddhism has the Dalai Lama as their leader, whereas Chinese Buddhism that you're talking about doesn't accept the Dalai Lama as leader. So, it is also to give an impression to the outside world that, on its human rights record and on Tibet, China is doing fine by promoting other religious groups as well. So now India has also started a global Buddhist congregation. 3 meetings have already been held. And along with cultural diplomacy, then India and Nepal have agreed on tourism promotion. During Prime Minister Modi's visit, that was in November, during SAARC, both the countries have established a sister city relationship between Kathmandu, Benares, Janakpur, Ayodhya and Lumbini, Sarnath. Now, Nepal has been a very popular tourist destination for India and for Indians. Indian rupee is acceptable there, and casinos and honeymooners. It was you don't need visa and passport as a result, and no language barrier also. However, we've seen that over the years, and whenever there was any political instability in Nepal, Indian government has never come with any advisory asking Indians not to go to Nepal or visit Nepal. However, of late we see a slight decrease in tourists traveling to Nepal because new destinations have come up like Singapore, Malaysia or Thailand. But on the other hand, religious tourism is going on and it is in fact increasing. So, large number of Indian tourists go to Nepal. And on the other hand, we see that China, which has been, Chinese tourists have also increased in Nepal. In 2011, 46,000 tourists from China had come to Nepal, and in 2013, 89,000 tourists have visited Nepal. And, it's said that because of air connectivity between the two countries, tourists from China have increased coming to Nepal. Flights from Lhasa, Chengdu, Shanghai, etc. are there till Kathmandu. Now, Chinese tourists do not know, most of them are not fluent in English language. So, as a result, it becomes mandatory for people in Nepal to know, especially those who deal with travel, tour, etc., or in tourism industry, to know Mandarin language. Now, especially coming again Pokhara, I've seen Chinese nationals have come and set up their businesses there. They have set up restaurants there. There's one particular restaurant, it's a Tibetan restaurant, and right in front of it there are 2 Chinese, hotels that have come up there. You don't even find, believe me, because I visited that place so many times, you don't even find, people having their meals there. And the owners and other staff of the hotel will be standing outside, just talking and but they are there. So is it just business or is it the Chinese presence increasing in Nepal? So that I leave it to you. Modi's visit, Modi also emphasized on infrastructure linkages. He proposed on highway information and technology connectivity between the 2 countries. This is something he had also emphasized at the SAARC meeting. Prime Minister Koirala had also emphasized on road and rail connectivity between the 2 countries. Now, number of agreements have been signed between India and Nepal on rail connectivity, on road connectivity. But either the DPR is not ready or they have to acquire land. So for something or the other, we realize that it has not been implemented to that level. But how soon after Modi's visit, I saw DTC has introduced Delhi-Kathmandu, Delhi international bus service. That started from 25th November onwards. And the India and Nepal have started a direct bus service from Varanasi and Kathmandu, linking the 2 prominent cities as well. And Modi has also set up a high-level meeting to discuss long-pending important rail connectivity between India and Nepal. For example, Jogbani, Viratnagar, or Jayanagar, Bihar, and Bardiabas in Nepal. On the other hand, we see that China is also now talking about infrastructure and rail road connectivity with Nepal. Their rail has already come till Lhasa, and they would like to bring it all the way till some say till Khasa or to Kathmandu as well. There is another proposal of having road connectivity along the Kosi river that is cutting across the entire Himalaya from north to south. So these are at the moment how proposal fails. China has shown its readiness. You can see that in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, all these details are there. However, Nepal is yet to formally propose to China for extension of rail link to the Nepal border. And when I am talking about India and China simultaneously, I am saying that Nepal was a link between the two countries. The link was somewhere slack, and you see now it's again Nepal trying to have connectivity with both India and China. So a country has a sovereign right to do so, which is kind of being said in the statements which come from Indian ministers as well. However, many a times these agreements that are signed with China by Nepal are at a critical juncture of something that has happened. For example, the Kathmandu-Kodari road, that was agreement was signed in 1601. That is the time Panchayat had just begun. King had taken power in his hand. Democracy was sidelined in Nepal, and Mahendra did not find favorable response from India. So Kathmandu-Kodari road at that time was considered as a breach to India's security. Today we realize that a lot of traffic from Kathmandu towards Lhasa goes via that particular route. Similarly, 85, when the western sector of Mahindra Rajmarg was given to China, again India had to pay some money to take that project back. Again, there were strategic implications for it. You didn't want Chinese forces to be, or not forces exactly, Chinese presence closer to the western sector of the Indian border. So, so many times it becomes difficult to differentiate between economic interest and the strategic interest, and at times they converge as well. But Nepal would like to take benefits from both the countries, and yes, it should. Now, India is Nepal's largest trading partner, and we see over the years China is now also emerging, and it is the largest, topmost investor in Nepal at the moment. If you talk to Nepalese, which are the two things that can enhance or give a big economic development in Nepal, they will talk in the tourism and hydropower. Tourism sector is something that I've already dealt with, and but most of the tourism sector also people who are coming from Western countries to Nepal are backpackers. So it is now Indian tourists and now Chinese tourists, which are the main stakeholders in the tourism sector. Now, when it comes to hydropower, Nepal has a huge water resource, but the agreements that Nepal has signed with India have always been controversial. Whether it is Kosi, Ganda, later on Anapur agreement was signed, or Mahakali agreement between the two countries. Now from Indian point of view, these agreements get involved in the domestic politics. For example, when Mahakali agreement was signed, the discussions were held by UML government, UML, with India. But when the agreement was signed, Prime Minister Dioba of Nepali Congress was the Prime Minister. So the day agreement, and India had insisted that there should be all-party consensus while signing the agreement. So believe me, the day agreement was signed, it was at night. Very next day, the text of the agreement was in the newspaper, and it was discussed on the road. And left party was saying that, well, we were shown a different draft, but the agreement that is signed is something else. So apart from the technicalities of the agreement, what the hype is on the political issues, and it becomes a tool in the domestic politics of Nepal. So it is happening time and again. What I saw in during Modi's visit this time, that he had signed power trade agreement with Nepal in 1997 as well. However, even that had not been successful to that. But during Modi's visit, power trade agreement was an issue, and which was discussed. It was not signed during his visit, but later on, the agreement was signed. Now here he is trying to make states only as facilitators. Nepal and India would act only as a facilitator, bring in private sector, let them develop hydropower, and let them also trade with each other, at a market price maybe. So I think that is something new, which Modi has done. business community in Nepal has welcomed it. Many people, practically across party lines, have welcomed our trading agreement at this time in Nepal. So now one has to wait and watch how it would proceed. On the other hand, China also wants to, in fact, two agreements were signed this time, and India and Nepal have, India has gone into Arun project, and this will, and another, in Upper Karnali project, GMR has signed an agreement. So this is the largest FDI that India, has entered in Nepal. Now, China, on the other hand, is also wanting to enter into the water projects. It is said that China Three Gorges Corp will undertake 1.8 billion West State River hydropower project in Nepal. So, but it will be only for the domestic consumption. I mean, the market will be within the country as well. So, from the above narrative, it is evident that Chinese presence is increasing in Nepal. China wants to have increasing role in South Asia and also in SAARC. And it is here China finds Nepal as a willing partner. China showed its willingness to, or its interest to elevate its role in SAARC. The 18th SAARC meeting summit that took place in Nepal this year had many important things to discuss and hydropower, etc. But on electricity, etc. But however, the entire discussion and debate was on China. If the officials in Nepal say that it was only media creation, at no official level any discussion took place, and China didn't come forward to it. But if you look at Chinese, official newspapers, whether Xinhua or China Daily, they have come up with statements either from the Deputy Foreign Minister of China or the spokesperson of Ministry of Foreign Affairs China, that China does want to have an increased role to play in SAARC, and Nepal would want, at which stage, it would be at a phased level as well. Straight away, do not make it a member, but a dialogue partner, but whatever level one can decide. But in this SAARC meeting, the engagement with observer states was also increased, where they said that at a project mode, a country can actually ask them for cooperation. Why I am bringing SAARC here? Because we have seen at bilateral level, so many agreements have been signed with Nepal. India is a big player there. Other countries are also now coming in Nepal, but China happens to be the second major player in Nepal. But this kind of cooperation between India and Nepal brings in a fear of India's dominance in Nepal. Well, it's not only cultural dominance or strategic, the political aspect, but also economic aspect. And even though Nepalese businessmen want to do business with India, they know India's booming economy and they want to have a share in it. But at the same time, there is also a fear of too much of India in Nepal. So, can we have other forums and mechanisms, as Sir was mentioning, where we can have this kind of economic cooperation? Now, Nepal had come up with a concept of sub-regional cooperation in 1996, and in 1997, I think it was accepted in the SAARC Colombo summit. One can have, sub-regional cooperation, for example, between Nepal, Bhutan, northeastern states of India and Bangladesh on energy level or infrastructure development. So if one can have at that level also, it would be a measure. I mean, it's not a measure be either or situation between bilateral or sub-regional, but one can have bilateral mechanism, sub-regional as well as a regional mechanism for for economic development of Nepal. And in fact, in February this year, representatives from Bangladesh, Bhutan, India and Nepal met in New Delhi and discussed sub-regional cooperation for working out a model for power grid and inter-grid connectivity. So this is another model that we see. That apart, both the countries can, as I said, as Ambassador Shah said, there are many other areas where one can think in terms of development. For example, education sector would be one, health sector is another one. But how much goodwill does it generate? That's another issue. So I would rather say that increase more scholarships for Nepalese students to India, And that would be one factor. When one talks about Baburam Bhattarai, you talk about the JNU linkages that you have and that emotional aspect of it. So I think that would be one way to have goodwill. Of course, good cause in the Indian armies, in the constituency and intelligence in Nepal. India has many livers in Nepal, which can be pressed at any point of time. However, it would also mean that creating a gap between government of India and the people and communities in Nepal. So, I would rather suggest that keeping all these variables in mind, keeping the domestic politics, economic scenario, India-China-Nepal relations in mind, as well as the presence of US, UK, other Scandinavian countries in Nepal, keeping that in mind, one has to have cooperation with Nepal at all the levels, whether it is bilateral, sub-regional or regional. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangeeta, for those remarks. And unlike you and Prashant, who were under a binding because the topic was prescribed for both of you, I think our next speaker has Mr. Anand Singh has an absolutely free hand because he is going to do some crystal gazing.
Am I audible?
No.
No.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Chairman sir, this is my second occasion being with you on an advanced seminar. We were together in the Central Command in Lucknow. And sir, I have a lot of regards for all diplomats who have served in Nepal. It's a very, very challenging job. Remember, they have to meet the aspirations of the Indians as well as their natives. So, don't take me amiss, but I remember, when I was doing staff college, and then Manik Shaw had invited all the good officers. So he asked, where are the officers from Nepal? So somebody said, sir, foreign officers were not invited. So he said, since when Nepal has become a foreign country? So don't take me amiss, because that is the kind of relationship between the two countries. But it was standing here in this hall. In this very hall, I have seen the vicissitudes with regards to the Maoists, the trajectory with regard to the Maoists. And I remember, I would divide it into three phases. And with regard to Mao, there's a general phase, and then the political phase, and now this regressive phase. So I remember in the jungle phase there was a seminar here, and on some different issue. The topic was I think SAARC or South Asia, and then during the proceedings, people then wanted a special session from Siddharth Varadarajan. So his claim to fame at that time was that he had managed to interview Prachanda. And Prachanda, those days, was a mythical man, lot of, prowess attributed to him, like, very much exaggerated. And well, I was not surprised because given the leanings of Hindu newspapers, he had to be the first journalist to be given access to him. So I saw that period, and then came this political phase. And when this transition to, Maoist transition into, mainstream politics came, I think they were riding on a big high. They were dictating all the political discourse in Nepal. And that is the time, after a few months, I was asked by the laws to write a book on this Nepal. So I said the best way is to travel. So I hitchhiked right from the Sarai region to Kathmandu, I went to Pokhara, I went to eastern Nepal, various places. And when I came, and I had 2 meetings with the president of Nepal that time. And when I came back here, I asked, I told the Gurmeet Kaur that I want a seminar immediately. He said, why so soon? You first complete your book. So I said, no, because the government is going to fall. Maybe within 48 hours. And so a seminar was called here, and I said, so the MEA reports, I think there was a deputy secretary from the MEA who was also invited, and I said, look, tell you people the government is going to fall. And sure enough, within 72 hours the government had fallen. So from that high, the Maoists had almost, that myth that surrounded them, that myth was totally knocked out. And now we are seeing, I'm standing here and now we are seeing the regressive phase of the Maoists, where they have reduced to a third position. They are no longer respected in the country. People think very little of them. But tell me, what has been the impact of the Maoists? One is that they have knocked Nepal, tried to knock Nepal out of its moorings. Second is, they have managed to, they are responsible for soft militarization of Indo-Nepal border. And you have introduced an element called SSB. People on the ground are very, very unhappy. I have also relatives that side in Nepal. People are very, very unhappy with this soft militarization of border. And thirdly, you cannot repudiate your past. For nation building, you have to constantly draw inspiration from your history. And the Maoists, they have disowned, they have repudiated the history of them. I'm just, speaking from the security point of view, other facets have been covered. Then what is this, common trajectory? Now this you must listen to me very carefully. Common trajectory between India and Nepal. Security related issues. One is, somehow in this part of the subcontinent, we have, for reasons I don't know, one ism traveled here after killing 2 million people, 3 million people in Soviet Russia, 2 million people in China. A very violent imported ism. Why we gave so much of respectability? Why not to other isms? Just because they captured the academia? Just because you had a progressive writers association? And now let me tell you, I was attending a seminar in Vivekanand, and there was General Rukmangad Katwal, who was the former army chief, and there was also this fellow called Pul, who was the Maoist commander, in the jungle phase. Rukmangad Katwal, he warned the Indians that let me give you a warning. We could have, and he pointed towards Pune, and he said we could have finished this guys anytime we wanted. But people said that no, they are your own people. You must not do this. And we spared them, and look where have they arrived. And he said that look, Nepal is a small country. We can't space trade for tank. But you have a huge space, the relative size is much bigger. So you are not feeling the heat. But nevertheless the heat is there. 182, now I think the last count is 108, from 230 it has come to 180 districts. So that is the trajectory, the common trajectory. The second, about this Maoist economy. There is a huge thriving Maoist economy here. there is a huge thriving Maoist economy in Nepal. General B.P. Malik, I mentioned, I have not mentioned his name in the book. He had gone on behalf of some industrial house, to explore the possibility of setting up some industry in Nepal, doing business there. So he told me that, when I came out, so somebody pointed out to a guy standing in the hotel lobby. He said, "Isse bhi baat kari." He said, "Who is he?" He ये माओइस्ट का नेता है, इसने हमारी एक फैक्ट्री तराई में ऑलरेडी बंद करवा दी, इसके परमिशन के बिना ये नहीं हो सकता है. So that is, and I have asked this question from Pune. So tell me, it was one session was on Nepal's economy. I said, what is your, what is the size of your parallel economy? So that is that, and the other issues are. Now look, this talk of federalism, somebody, I think one of the speakers mentioned, there is no foreign hand. There is immense amount of foreign hand. In this federalism, the Chinese are interested in one kind of federalism and the Western countries are interested in other kind of federalism. Now you would say why they are interested, the Western countries? Now you all know that for last few years what has happened, that the Maoists are not drawing as much of psychological or philosophical or financial sustenance from China as much they are drawing from the European countries. Germany, Italy, France, the last meet was held at Hamburg. And remember, the Maoists are also a member of CComposa, this is Coordination Committee of Maoist parties in South Asia. So that is that. Now, the Chinese are interested in not more than 2-3 provinces, because they are very, very apprehensive that should you have small provinces, ethnic provinces, and by the way, there is no ethnic group in Nepal where in a given area there are more than 30% of the population. So this is total bunkum. This is a fraud being perpetrated by the Maoists on the people of Nepal. So the Chinese are interested on a bigger size provinces, maybe mainly 2 or 3, because they do not want to deal with many units. While the Western countries, the Americans, they are interested in these ethnic, provinces based on ethnicity. Because, firstly, that facilitates conversions. Secondly, it gives them the leverage against Tibet, and you all have known about this, how Mustang was used as a base, during that Khampa period. So that is definitely a foreign, and then the role of the NGOs. Nepal is also fed up of the NGOs like we have done, like we are. So these are, some common trajectories between India and Nepal. Now, what are the elusive issues at the moment? Federalism we have spoken about. The most contentious issue in Nepal today is this secularism. The mainstream parties which had supported, which had voted in favor, which had supported this for a secular constitution, they are vertically split on the issue. KP Oli of UML, he has been asking for a revision of this. This on this issue of secularism. In 1991, a British parliamentary delegation came to Nepal and he told K.P. Bhattarai that you should adopt a secular constitution. And K.P. Bhattarai bluntly told that delegation that the British, who are the mother of Westminster democracy, should you abandon anglicism, we will adopt secular constitution. So it is not that they are not. In fact, when I was writing this book, that time I was not aware of the activities of these, these countries, Norway, Finland, and all. But when I was walking, I saw. I mean, my God, embassy of Finland. What's this country doing here? All of them were in cahoots with the Maoists. And finally, crystal gazing, you understood to me. In my book, I had given 3 scenarios. One was the Maoist takeover of Nepal. The second was a split of Nepal, Tarayi Hills. And the third was a bloodbath in Kathmandu. But I would like to revise my position after Modi's visit. And that position is that, for some time, Nepal may trudge along. And till today, I mean, it has carried on without a formal constitution. It is because of the benign influence of India. It is because of ambassadors like the chair. And it is because of the moorings, very strong moorings of the past. Now there is already a demand. One of the leading politicians of UML has said that Prithvi Narayan Shah's birthday should be celebrated as national unity. So this is how they are trudging along, but I have at the moment no hope of any constitution, because for a simple thing, now they are divided between parliamentary system and whether they should have elected president or not. They are divided over the first past the post system and proportional representation. Then their contention is that all issues in the Constituent Assembly will not be voted by a majority but by unanimity. Now that is something of an impossible feat. So this is the kind of democratization that has been done to the Maoists. So therefore, there can be no solution to the political problems in Nepal unless these people are totally humbled. I don't know in what way, but they have to be totally out of the scene. So I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer your question after session. Thank you.
Thank you for presentation, because there's lots of elements on which we can reflect. I'll use my prerogative to make just a couple of comments on each of the presentations, and I have one question. And then I'll throw the floor open. You panelists don't have to respond to the question that I put straight away, because we take questions from the floor. But I'll start with the reverse order. I'll start with Mr. Alfian Singh. And I'm very glad that his surmise is that the Maoists are in cahoots with the Westerners, because that's better than they're being in cahoots with the Chinese. And also I wanted to say that the Maoist party has had a transformation as remarkable as the transformation of the Communist Party of Nepal, United Marxist-Leninists. And those of you who follow Nepal would remember that the CP and UML emerged as a political force first in the area immediately adjacent to Naxalbari village, which incidentally abuts the Nepalese territory. And exactly what happened in Naxalbari in '67 happened 2.5 years later in Nepal, where the heads of a few landlords were chopped off by some of the people who are in the present leadership of CP and UML. But look at the transition in Nepal, how quickly Nepalese leftists, Maoists, communists have moved from an extreme position of violent movement to democracy, how they have become very eclectic in their outlook, that from the mid-90s onward, CP and UML has been providing prime ministers to Nepal, elected prime ministers. And the two richest persons of Nepal, the richest indigenous Nepali and the richest overseas Nepalese nationals, are both members of CP and UML, not of the Congress party. So that's one. The second transformation that you see also, similar one, that the Indian Maoists were the ones who trained the Nepalese Maoists in guerrilla warfare. And some of the photographs appeared during my time. The popular news magazines in the vernacular carried those photographs. And you see immediately, the photographs of shorter statured Nepalese and tall and well-built and darker complexioned Indian Maoists who were from Andhra Pradesh. You can see where they came from. And look at where the Indian Maoists are. The Indian Naxalites are only represented in the third tier of our democracy. And you see what happened to CP and UML. And the Maoists are still combating the Indian state, and the Nepalese Maoists have had two prime ministers. And vis-a-vis India, there has been also a remarkable transformation. The party, CP and UML, nearly broke. Sangeeta ji, I'm so glad she recalled the debates within the CP and UML on the Mahakali Treaty. The party decided very narrowly at the time Mr. Madhav Nepal takes the leadership of the party on supporting that agreement, and he survived narrowly by one vote in the internal debate in the party at the time. And so similarly, the Maoists had a party convention while I was in Kathmandu, where India was, as an expansionist power, was categorized as the most important enemy of the Nepalese people in their previous party documents. All those references, there were multiple, over a dozen such references in the previous Congress that they had held, were taken out when they held a Congress after a gap of 12 or 14 years. So finally, one other important point made by Mr. Avisal Singh, and something for us to ponder, that we are softly militarizing the India-Nepal border, and that's unfortunate because that's something that our Prime Minister is conscious of. So one of the slogans he carried to Nepal on his first visit was that we are determined to convert our borders into bridges instead of being barriers. And I think that impulse is being carried forward in the instructions that are handed down to SSP personnel at the border. They are no longer, they are strict instructions that they are not meant to enforce customs norms, etc. That's for the customs officials. They should not harass people and so on. And so we are trying to take several steps to improve border management without doing it in an intrusive way. But what might happen there is a lot of pressure from those who are hostile to India and hostile to the Madhesi population living in the Sarai to encourage this militarization of the border. I think Sangeeta ji's presentation was very valuable. She interestingly evoked one point about the China-Nepal relationship, which is important, which is neglected in India, the aspect of their cultural diplomacy. And internally in China, let me tell you, that now the Chinese have great differentiation in their society, and there are more millionaires in China than in India. And in China, the rich, for them to be really distinguished as part of the elite, they need to have a personal guru, and that personal guru invariably happen to be Buddhists. And many of them, these personal gurus, also owe their allegiance to the Dalai Lama, surprisingly, including people very close to President Xi Jinping's family. So this is something quite extraordinary about China. They follow a different brand of Buddhism generally, and the kind of entente that they are trying to develop with Nepal is also has an element of the Buddhist connection. I think on the power potential, the good points made, the GMR and the SJVN, which are in the run for completing the Karnali and the Arun 3 projects. They have a huge task ahead of them. On the India-China connection on hydropower, let me tell you that while best safety might be for indigenous consumption of power in Nepal, we in India have no problem whatsoever with the Chinese building power plants in Nepal, because power production in Nepal is one way for Nepal to redress its adverse trade balance. And the Chinese are beginning to export more and more to Nepal, not as much as India, because we still take care of roughly 2/3 of their imports. But the Chinese, after 10 years of trying to increase Nepalese exports to China, have managed to increase it from 0.4% to 1.8%. So if they take a little bit of electricity from Nepal into Tibet, it's good for Nepal. But most of the electricity that the Chinese would produce in Nepal would be for Nepal's consumption, which is also good for India, because we are energy deficit and we export energy to Nepal today. And any surplus energy that is produced in Nepal can only be sold to India. And when India develops grid connectivity and strengthens it with Bangladesh's future requirements will be taken care of from our northeast. So perhaps we will start supplying electricity to other parts of India from Nepal, and also perhaps to Pakistan if Pakistan chooses to link up their grid with the Indian grid, for which our standing offer still stands. But the military in Pakistan is against the idea in a country which has 8 to 10 hour power cuts to link the Amritsar-Lahore line, or to create a new high-density direct current line to keep the grid separate, because they feel that it would be a terrible humiliation for Pakistan to start importing electricity from India. But in the future, maybe Nepal's electricity could pass through India to Pakistan. So there were very interesting takeaways from her presentation. But you see, there is the Chinese presence in South Asia, India included, is growing in a creeping, pervasive way in our economy and in our society, and so also in all the countries of the neighborhood. So what do we have to do? We just have to lift our game in dealing with their presence. In Nepal, their presence is so far defensive in orientation, but they could use that to their advantage if there is a period of India-China confrontation in the future. So we are obviously and naturally watchful of what they are doing there, but so far they are doing it for reasons which Prashant explained in this presentation. For Prashant, I have a more complex comment and a question, and you answer it at the end when you have your 3 minutes each for round-up comments, which is that India's problem in intervening in Nepal, let me remind the audience that whenever we have intervened strategically and decisively, the so-called Indian intervention has actually tailed Nepali mainstream public opinion. So 1950, King Tribhuvan escaped from his palace to the Indian ambassador's residence and was brought to Delhi in parallel with a movement which was incipient democratic movement, which was also an armed movement, which was started from Indian soil, inspired by India's struggle for independence. Many of the leaders of that movement had actually been jailed by the British fighting for India's independence movement. So then in 1990, again it was a people's movement to which India reacted. In 2006, and again January 2007, the Madesi movement, India reacted in support. And you remember that there were some problems with evolution of the Indian position. Dr. Karan Singh went to Nepal, and then there was some backtracking by government of India, and Mr. Shyam Saran's statement got fully behind the opinions expressed by the people's movement, and government of India declared that whatever the people of Nepal want, government of India wants precisely the same thing. So the point is that we should not get embroiled in the day-to-day evolution of politics in Nepal. That would be wise. But we should be ready to intervene strategically when we read the situation correctly and we feel that something is close to fruition, we should help Nepal to bring it to a conclusion. But it's a very difficult balancing act. My question to you specifically is that the political arithmetic in Nepal is very difficult compared to India. And politics in Nepal on surface looks similar to India, but in reality it's different because the Nepalese Kshetris and Hill Brahmins alone constitute 31% of the population of Nepal, whereas in India similar groups constitute 15-16% of the population in the aggregate. So to reverse or re-engineer politics in Nepal or to make it more inclusive is very difficult. There are 75 districts in Nepal. When I was in Nepal, 72 districts out of 75 had Hill Kshetris or Hill Brahmins as district officers in the district, including in the Tarai district. And the difference between the Tarai and the Hills is that 1/3 of the population of Nepal exactly is Madhesi in origin, people speaking Urdu, Maithili, Bhojpuri, Hindi, etc., Bengali, and 2/3 are Hill peoples. Out of the Hill peoples, there is a significant number. The caste division of India does not apply to Nepal because there are the Hill Brahmins and Kshetris and then there are the Janjatis. The Janjatis who Indian Armed Forces personnel are very familiar with because they are the Guruns and they are the Hindus and they are the Rais and so on. So the question is, will the ruling parties, the two of them, be able to force a constitution by going clause by voting instead of by consensus? Will the Janjati and Madhesi members of these two parties, UNL and Congress, vote with the party according to a party which does it apply, does it not apply? And if they promulgate such a constitution by voting, will it stick in Nepal? This is the question that I'd like you to answer at the end. Now the floor is open.
Thank you, Chair. I want to flag two issues. One is China, and the second is the hydro. China, of course, the Chair Jan said a lot. They are trying to make inroads in South Asia as nothing new. But as far as Nepal is concerned, they are bringing this Tibet railway right up to the border in Nepal, and by 2020 they want to bring it to a place called Kerung. Similarly on the road, they are upgrading and building this Araniko road. It all comes into Nepal, and finally I am concerned we will come into India. From the economic issue, it's good, but from strategic, there are different. But before that, on the future, after hearing you, I am convinced there is no future in Nepal. What you said is there is no future in Nepal. And that is my conclusion after hearing the first speaker. Coming back to what I am saying. China succeeded in Nepal vis-a-vis the Tibetan refugees. They are not allowed to come any further. They are sent back and things. So China is winning there. And I am not very clear on the study center, the cultural study center, 35 that you mentioned. I don't know what we have. We have a cultural center, whatever we have. So I want to know that despite their foreign minister when he went there in December last year, saying that they have a common community destiny, and Modi has used, I call him Modi now, no longer Modi, which is mostly abroad. Modi has used the destiny word again. So between China and India, notwithstanding all that is being said, what is the level of success the Chinese should be of concern to us, despite this multi-layered, deep-rooted Indian influence in their life? On hydropower, what the chair has clarified in great detail. What I have never understood, Kosi, Mahakali, whatever the projects are, this bringing in the private sector which we are talking about is not a new phenomenon. The private sector has been wanting to come in. So what I want to know is from the chair, what are you basing this tremendous optimism of yours that Nepal is going to be giving power to Pakistan of the 83,000 or 83,400 megawatts potential of Nepal? What is it today? Is it in a few thousand? So what is going to happen miracle-wise in Nepal?
100 of it.
Pardon?
100 of it.
But whatever
Right
it is,
now.
yeah. I mean, what do you think will be done? I mean, the private sector, personally in Washington, in one of these Nepal seminars, I said, why doesn't Japan take over? Why don't some of the Scandinavian countries come and do this hydropower business? Because it is, to use your terminology, a win-win situation for India. I even want to extend a recommending that if Chinese come, very nice. And when I say no future, what I meant is that you said we are in the regressive phase.
No, Maoists are in the
Yeah, I mean Maoists
And that is why there is a future.
And since Maoists have decided to seem to be controlling and the parallel economy, etc., we can talk a little more about what the future, not the stories that you take, which are very interesting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for those questions.
A very interesting comments for the chair and the three speakers. Most enjoyable. Just a few thoughts. Once, I'm understood this thing about the Indian Armed Forces being so scared of roads coming in. And they have been scared for 60 years and they have refused to develop the Northeast because Chinese will come in. For God's sake, get those roads and get the beating. That's reverse as psychology. We have been too defeaters for too long. I don't think we should be scared of roads. And about a decade back, I was in Mizoram. And the chief minister, I met him there. I think this was in 2001. I have to tell this, I mean, it is a regressive mindset. So he says, why isn't the army permitting us to have this mobile connectivity here? I said, as far as I'm concerned, please have it. But later on, I found out there were restrictions. The question is, whenever we restrict these things, we are actually exemplifying our own weakness. Please build your roads. The road is not for Delhi to come to Delhi. It is for Delhi to go to Beijing. Let's reverse the psychology. That is the first one. Coming to the presentation problem. Prashant, you said India's interests, we need to influence public opinion and policy in Nepal, rightly so. Every country would like to influence their public and you would like your own policy to be implemented. And then you talked about a push, ideally push or we have a hands-off approach. My point is, why can't it be both? You see, the question is, the way I look at it is, there has to be a push, but it should look like a push. And that is where diplomacy comes in. The whole point is, on the diplomacy front, I have to mention this. I just brought the Nepalese, a very senior official some years back. And he told me that one of the ambassadors had a chief to summon the king. Even we can, the High Commissioner is summoning the king. It happens. So if you have a High Commissioner who will summon the king, I think, it doesn't really matter what you do elsewhere, all the relations go. So there has to be a very strong push model. But I think the perception among the ground is that it is being asked for by the Nepalese and it is not being pushed for by India. So that is the combination which I think our diplomacy and our foreign office and the home ministry, I think they have to work out. And then they work out one example. The second point which I had was, this study centers, these 30 or 40 study centers. I see no reason why India not establishing these study centers. When you're looking at the influence which foreigners are doing even in India, when you're looking at our own business houses, nobody says that you're propagating a particular line, but the more study centers which India needs to have these think tanks there, and again they have to be done very well. Now, when we are planning a think tank, for 10 years we are planning it's not been executed and China is for 40 of them. Now you can imagine how much influence China is getting with those think tanks. They don't have to propagate any particular interest, they just say. So we need to propagate our interests. It could be done again through a back channel approach through the Nepalese, right? Because you could have these institutions and I think they have to be functioning. Because you need to have somebody to propagate your thoughts through them. How is Indian public opinion shaped? It is shaped by your TV. Now, Swami, when he speaks, he's shaping your opinion. The newspapers are shaping your opinion. So who's shaping your opinion in Nepal? So unless you have your people there, they're not going to be shaped. My last point, I think I agree with Ravi. The question is, when we're looking at the word secular in this constitution, who has defined the word secular? If you speak to 20 people in India, in fact, if you speak to everybody in this very August hall, everybody will have a different definition of secularism. Now, unless you define the word, what is secular, nobody, it is meaningless. What secularism means to the West means that the state has got nothing to do with religion. Now, that is not the definition which is followed in India. And in its implementation in India, what is happening is that we use the word secular, it means simply a state to beat the majority and to promote minority interests. That is what secular really means in India. And let's be frank about it. Unless we start, unless you start talking sense, it doesn't really work. Now, what is the secularism that you want to live on? You want it to be based on respect. If it is respect, then use the word dharma. Dharma is what Nepal is all about. So why don't we come down to speaking what is required, at least propagating it? So why are we so scared? I mean, sometimes I think we have to get rid of all this hypocrisy and start talking sense. That is where the history thing comes in. There is a shared history, and I think if you have got a shared history which goes back thousands of years, right? There is a common interest. There is nothing to be ashamed about that history. I think that needs to be propagated. And when you're looking at this history that Pakistan has forgotten, you see the problem which they have come into it because they have forgotten their history. Right? You cannot create a false history. You have to fall back onto your roots. And I think unless we do something like that, it's not really going to work. So it's just not what that
I am Major Ranjan from Integrated Defense Talk. Very educated talk given by all the right speakers. It's very educated talk. I would just like to add on to the query which have been just been given by two gentlemen. Do we have any comprehensive foreign policy to deal with a particular country? Actually, I am not aware. Maybe this area is totally new to me. If we don't have, are we trying to develop that kind of policy in the particular country? Keeping in view, as Speaker brought out, that China has probably got a very comprehensive policy to deal at least with Nepal. Similarly, is trying to talk about a strategy for Bhutan also. And maybe other peripheral countries where they have started with first of all settling the border disputes. Seeing the Chinese inroads, whether it is in the infrastructure, keeping in view the getting into hand projects, now initially it was developing road, Adiko road has already come up, second road is coming up. 6 crossings which are there, it is already talked about a plan, surveys have already been carried out to make those roads. Dry port for itself already constructed in 6 being undertaken. 6 for Nepal province, getting the railway line, first one right coming to Kerala, another 350 kilometers, making Kathmandu and subsequently to Lundri only province. Making a world-free city in Lundri, transforming the Nepalese Buddhism into Chinese Buddhism. Probably countering Indian Buddhism by stating that Lundri is the birthplace, not the other birthplace. Creating controversy wherein we have been trying to have twin city projects involving 3 twin cities, creating a rift between India and Nepal as the culture goes. Countering Kirtans, trying to counter the US strategy which was already starting it, which was already being followed in Bhutan. Controlling Kirtans activities yesterday or day before yesterday when this Kirtan rebellion this thing was to be celebrated, they were total embargo on any kind of activity, and it was successful. Creating a lot of posts, one coming up in Samegaon and suddenly will be coming to other 6 places, also to control the Kirtan movement to that side. Making mid-hill highway already promised, other roads from north to south, 6 axes already planned. Getting into the policy, basically the federal structure, not to get that kind of federal structure wherein they have anticipate federalism, supporting the other 6 basically, or 2 reasons. One is to address the own insecurity of not having the cause being dominated because of that or and also to deal with particular region as one distinct entity to foster its own infrastructure development and community development. And so forth. I'll counter the speaker. Other issues are already, I think, already discussed with the Chinese Study Center, what they are doing, what are the Confucius centers doing, what are the media forums which are doing. In media forum and especially recently Xinhua news agency branches coming up in Terai region, which is also intelligence arm, and their FM radios constantly basically harping on two things. One is the China's way of infrastructure development, which is more successful than the Indian and more long-lasting. And second is to counter Indian religion and cultural bonds with Nepal. Very, very important issue. That is soft part which Alex trying to. Whereas India, though it has the advantage with connectivity wise and old historical and cultural bonds.
We have done
Yes, sir.
over the time. So
Sir,
ask your question.
Is that is so, sir? Then what is the policy which we have to arrive at, keeping with the static perspective for that country, and are we having it in case not, and what is your take?
Okay. Since the questions have been very long, there are two more questions we are going to take. The speakers, unfortunately, sorry, can we discuss it in the tea break or over lunch? Because we have a lady there. Sorry, I didn't see. So you can go first, and then the gentleman at the back who has been waiting for a long time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think since there's been so much spoken about on China, I think one of the points which seems to have been amiss is not looking at it directly from a security prism. The Chinese involvement in South Asia is a larger impression and an imprint. This is not what the Chinese policy is. So the Chinese policy rather is a larger imprint on how the Xi Jinping administration is consolidating its foreign policy structures. And here it's very important to note that it is being done from two ways, one through the government and the other through the party. And this point needs to be stressed upon in greater detail. I personally felt that it somehow went amiss. The most important meeting that has happened has been the Peripheral Diplomacy Conference. And Xi Jinping has very personally seen this conference through. He has consolidated the Chinese rejuvenation or the Chinese dream concept in this conference, and this was followed, perhaps, in my opinion, with the most assertive comment on foreign affairs in November of 2014, when the CCP conference on the works relating to foreign affairs was convened in Beijing. These two conferences have defined not just China's take on foreign affairs in Asia, it defines China's take on Southeast Asia, South Asia particularly, and every country's relation which impacts China. And I think Nepal figures very distinctively in this, given the very sensitive issue of the Tibetan exiles which are residing in Nepal. So I just wanted to share this with the panel as well as the audience.
Thank you. We take that as a comment, a very useful comment, because the CPC representatives who I have accidentally run into, I'm not a China hand, and at very startling places like India Foundation or the IS, I've asked them, what they were doing there, and they said that it is our policy as a party to deal with the entire spectrum of political opinion in all the periphery of China, which is very interesting. So thank you for that comment. Gentlemen, at the end, that's the last question. Can you please keep it short?
I've heard Mr. Prashant Jha before speaking on Nepal at other forums as well. And my question to him has partially been already asked by the Honorable Chair. And this is regarding your desire or hope that India take a more proactive part in the political developments in Nepal. I wish that you had related this to the major problem within Nepal of this 3+1+1, which actually Colonel Larasan Singh has brought into his thing without specifically mentioning them. And by the 3+1+1, which confounds this entire thing of whether it's going to be first past the post or proportional what should the size of the provinces in federalism be? These 3+1+1 are the Brahmins, the Kshatris, the Nevars, as one group, within which the Nevars don't like the others, of course, and the Madeshis and the Janjatis. Unless you're clear in your mind as to how India is going to deal with this 3+1+1 separately or as a monolith, as you seem to have treated some aspects of Nepali politics, I'm afraid it isn't going to work. If you have a solution to how an active role in Indian diplomacy and foreign affairs is going to deal with this, I'm afraid any prescription will only lead to the conclusion that Colonel Arjun Singh has already given us, that there is no hope for Nepal politics. And I say this with the background of Nepal back from my school days when I went back and forth, and people like Gyanendra were my dormitory mates and so on, down to meetings with Baburam Bhattacharya and so on. I won't go into that, but I'm speaking with some background in addition to being from the Gorkha Rifles. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. But let me remind this audience that when you speak about no hope for Nepal, and this is also addressed to Mr. Singh, incidentally we'll go in reverse order, so we'll start from the left. People used to say precisely and exactly the same thing about India. Mr. Singh, you have 2 minutes.
Just 2 quick points. Nation building process cannot be hostage to, the cadence, oscillations, or, undulations of one political or insurgent outfit, sir. 1. 2 is, sir, please, for God's sake, I'm fed up of this, these ethnic issues. Sir, tell me which country in this world does not have features? Which country in this world does not have fault lines? I mean, there was a king. All these Janjatis were there. You have served in Gorkha regiments. Have you seen any differences between these Janjatis, these Rais and Limbus? I mean, this totally Western construct. Which country doesn't England have its fault lines? Please, let's deconstruct this, this ethnicity being peddled, by the Western countries for their own benefit. Sir, I didn't say that there is no hope. I said there is a hope. Now that the Maoists are on witness, they have to be humbled finally, sir, where they don't have a say, and they are so badly cornered now that they have resorted to sabotaging the Constituent Assembly by saying that there should be a consensus, which is an impossible proposition. About these China study centers, some of them are functioning in 2 rooms, some of them are functioning in 3 rooms. My information is that those in the Tarai region, and when I wrote this book, there were 9 of them. Some of them were in the business of intelligence gathering. Some of them were also in cahoots with the Maoists. Maoists from India, used to visit these China study centers. There is one in Pokhara, which I saw. There is a China study center which has been opened in Beijing also. So, any other question you would like? So, I didn't say that there is no hope, but let me tell you, there is a wave of Hinduism as far as Tarai is concerned. So, this, the people in Nepal say that look, our king earlier used to travel to Varanasi and go to Vishwanath temple, and your newspapers, your televisions never carried any story about it, as if you were in a defensive that why is he a Hindu? But today, why Modi is so popular, why did he choose to go to Pashupati temple? There must be some reason behind it, and that is paying dividends. 2014, Nepal has been very, very quiet lately. Very quiet. Those buns and this thing, which was every second day, those were not there. There is as she said, Nepal is Modi man. Today, if Modi was to stand for elections in Nepal, he would easily become the head of state of Nepal. That is the situation, and because you have finally gone to your own common moorings, amongst which your religious mooring is very, very important, whether you like it or not, whether you call me a criminal or a secular, it does not matter at all.
Pick up three at the moment. Let me begin by saying that the Chinese presence increased in Nepal more after 2008, the Beijing Olympics. And secondly, presence or increased presence of US, UK, and other Scandinavian countries also led China to have its presence there. Now, at that time, King Yanindra was in power. But again, and China has always accepted monarchy as the political force in Nepal. But once monarchy was out, then China had to change its dealings with Nepal. Now, and any two countries, especially those two neighbors, would do so, and more so in the case of China, when Tibet is right there, bordering Nepal. So Chinese have started, talking to other political parties, which was not the case earlier. Secondly, these Chinese study centers, Buddhism, etc., is a soft power diplomacy, because even though all the joint communiques and statements between Nepal and China begin with geographical complementarity as well as cultural linkages, but you and I know that how much cultural linkages were there, except certain communities in the northern quarter of Nepal and the Tibetan communities. But having said this, now I see, yes, Chinese presence is increasing, and Nepal has consistently followed one China policy. Nepal realized that China was upset with the protests and demonstrations in support of Dalai Lama. So Dalai Lama's office in Kathmandu has been closed. I've been to that office twice. They're not even interested to talk to us. We go to our office in Lajpat Nagar. I mean, they don't. I have students who are working on Tibetans in Nepal, for example, but we don't get information from Nepal now. So there is this fear of Nepalese. They don't want to talk about Tibetan issue. Period. You talk to a journalist in Nepal about what's China doing. We don't know. But anything that happens between India and Nepal, very next day, it's in the newspaper. PTA was not even signed, but the text was there, and people were discussing about PTA. So that is something. Too much of media freedom also creates problem at times, because we do not see that happening between Nepal and China. So it does tell you some kind of relationship that exists between the two. Is it fear? I don't know. Or is it because they do not have too much of close connections that India and Nepal has? That can happen. Journalists and every pressure group between India and Nepal have connections with each other. Now, why is India then not starting study centers the way Chinese have done so? Once I asked someone in the Indian embassy. She said she was in charge of BP Kurala foundation, and she said, so shall we start Hindi centers in Nepal? So, I mean, believe me, they didn't know, because we have taken cultural linkages between India and Nepal as the given thing. So now we don't have to work on it. But now I've realized that now, there is a change, especially Modi. Talk to people in RSS, now that are working on RSS and BHP, how they're looking at Nepal. They are not talking about Hindu link, but now they have started talking about Buddhist circuit. So this is something new that I am seeing, Is it as a reaction to China? Yes, it is. Yes, it is, and even though maybe at the China may not have any kind of negative things, but there, as I said, cultural, economic issues, relations cannot be totally, separated from the strategic and tactical aspects as well. So it happens. Third, of course, because of these close cultural linkages, these links have existed at people-to-people level between Nepal and India. But I'm afraid it does not, these cultural commonalities do not mean you will have foreign policy common interests as well, or you will have complementarity in your strategic interests. It does not happen like that. These Nepal, India have certain divergences, certain convergences. They work on the basis of their own national interests, defined by the elite in their particular time and context. Now here I would say, however, during critical junctures, these cultural linkages have acted between the political elite of India and Nepal as well. Thank you.
I'll just take two questions. Two questions. One is yours and one is on India's role. What I meant when I said that perhaps India should take a more proactive role. So on your question, which is whether Janjati and Madhesi MPs within Nepali Congress and UMN will vote for the constitutional model that the ruling parties are pushing. I think there are certain variables and we don't have a clear-cut answer. We know that unlike the last CA, where there were Janjati and Madhesi, there was a Janjati caucus and there was a Madhesi caucus. There was also a women's caucus and there were members who across political lines, party lines, formed alliances. This time, wising up perhaps because of the last experience, the ruling parties had not allowed the formation of caucuses. So the kind of solidarities and alliances that was built last time are missing this time. The second issue is that the immediate needs of political survival have really gripped the Janjati and Madhesi MPs in these parties. Given how political parties operate in South Asia and Nepal, patronage is really important. The patronage of top leaders is particularly critical. The Nepali Congress has a convention coming up, and the Madhesi MPs in Nepali Congress do not want to alienate the party leadership at the moment. Within the UMN, those Janjati MPs and Madhesi MPs who opted out the last time were not electorally successful. So they also look at what has happened to those who have defected. So all of that has created a deterrent. So on balance, as of now, it does look like they have the numbers and the Janjati and Madhesi MPs will throw the party line. But the variable that I was referring to is if community pressure and crowd pressure builds up. We did see that the opposition was able to mount a fairly successful rally about 10 days ago. And if the opposition protests mount and if Sarai is turbulent, there will be community pressure on these MPs to stand up to their parties. And if that happens, then we may have a configuration come up. But as of now, the balance is that the balance could suggest balance of power the ruling parties have in the first place. And these members will not be on the second question, you mentioned in the zones of youth. I agree with you entirely. I mean, this is something I said that India has a role, but that role has to be it has to be played in a very subtle manner. Sometimes clear projection of power and clear projection of where you are is important. But sometimes, often a certain push has to happen very quietly. And for the past 5 years or so, I would suggest that after Ambassador Prasad came and under Ambassador Ranjit also, what we are seeing is that India is very involved, it's very engaged with the political process, but it's very low profile. It's not done in an assertive way, and I think that's a very helpful productive approach. I do not treat, especially in the question of the constitution, we know that there is a political polarization and there are social thought lines that you refer to. There are ancestries, there are Janjati groups, and then there are Madhesis, and all the issues have to be accommodated. And it is very difficult for India to come in and mediate a pact that satisfies everybody. I understand that. But when I said that India could play a role, the disputes right now on the constitution are not really intractable. The core issues, the other issues, as I suggested earlier, have been resolved in the form of government and electoral system. On federalism too, if you really get into the nuts and bolts, the problem essentially is over 6 districts. In the Tarai, the far east districts, the far west districts, and one district in the middle. And whether it will remain a part of the Tarai province or whether it will remain a part of the Tarai province. Now, there are many compromise models that are floating around in the political bazaar in Kathmandu, breaking up these districts, merging one district with the hill so that the hill parties have the sense of assurance that they are connected to the border, they have access to the border, and they are not overwhelmingly dependent on the Tarai provinces, or merging one district this side, one district on the other side. What it means is, of course, independent civil society initiatives within Nepal to try to bring the parties together, but also some I think, a little bit of push from here in terms of not backing one model over the other, but suggesting to the various stakeholders to moderate their positions, telling the Maoists and Madhesis that they will not get what they want. Because if they did not get it in the first CA, when the balance of power was in their favor, they will not get it. They will have to tone down their demands. But also telling the NCUM that the constitution, this is the second part of your question, that they may be able to pass it, but I really think that the constitution will not pass. Nepal has had several constitutions. We've had 6 or 7 constitutions. The problem is not writing a constitution, the problem is sustaining it. So even if they manage to push a constitution of that form, they will have to sooner or later
Thank you very much. We are all going to be around at lunchtime, so we pursue these discussions over our leave. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'm really sorry as chair I couldn't control the time, so we have transgressed very much into the Bhutan discussions. I apologize for that.
We'll resume in 15 minutes after tea break. Thank you very much.
Conversation.